The moment Thomas Whitmore's fingers brushed her shoulder, he felt it, not flesh, not fabric, but something that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. The girl who'd been sobbing in his barn loft wasn't warm. She wasn't cold either. She was nothing at all. "Please don't touch me," she wept again, her voice carrying like wind through hollow bones. In the amber glow of his lantern, Thomas could see straight through her trembling form to the hay bales stacked behind her. The translucent outline of a young woman, maybe 17, wearing a torn calico dress that flickered between solid and shadow. Thomas stumbled backward, his weathered hands shaking. 43 years he'd worked this ranch outside Silver Creek, Montana. He'd seen drought kill cattle, seen wolves tear through his flock, seen men die slow deaths from fever and bullet wounds. But this was something his mind couldn't grasp. You're not," the words died in his throat. "I know what I am," she whispered, her form solidifying just enough for him to see the dark stains across her dress front. "Blood, old blood that had never dried. I've been trying to leave for so long, but I can't. Something keeps pulling me back here." The barn groaned in the night wind, and Thomas noticed things he'd missed in his initial shock. The horses hadn't stirred when she'd appeared. No insects buzzed around the lantern. Even the mice had gone silent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. She turned toward him fully, and Thomas saw her face clearly for the first time. Beautiful, yes, but marked by a terror so profound it seemed carved into her very essence. Her eyes held depths of sorrow that belonged to someone much older, someone who'd seen the worst of what men could do. "My name is Sarah," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Sarah Mackenzie. And I think you might be the first person who can see me in 20 years. 20 years. Thomas felt his knees nearly buckle. He'd bought this ranch 22 years ago from a family eager to sell cheap and leave fast. They'd never said why. "What happened to you, Sarah?" he managed to ask. Her form flickered again, becoming nearly invisible. "That's what I've been trying to remember. But every time I get close to the truth, something drags me back into the darkness." She looked at him with desperate hope. "Will you help me?" Thunder rumbled in the distance, though no storm clouds had marked the evening sky. Thomas spent the night in his kitchen, whiskey burning his throat as he tried to convince himself he'd imagined it all. But when dawn broke gray and cold, he found fresh tears frozen in the hay where Sarah had knelt. Tears that couldn't belong to any living thing. He had a choice: walk away, pretend he'd never seen her, sell the ranch and leave, just like the Mackenzies had done decades ago. It would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. Instead, he found himself climbing back into the loft that evening. "You came back," Sarah said, her relief so palpable it seemed to warm the air around her. "I gave my word." Over the following nights, Thomas learned fragments of Sarah's story. She remembered a summer evening, the scent of wildflowers, someone calling her name, then nothing but darkness and the endless loop of returning to this barn, this moment of terror she couldn't escape. "There was a man," she whispered during their fourth encounter, "someone I trusted, but his face, I can't see his face." Thomas began asking careful questions around town. Old-timers remembered the Mackenzie family, good people who'd left sudden like after their daughter disappeared. Tragic business, they said. Search parties had combed every inch of the valley. No trace of sweet Sarah Mackenzie was ever found, but Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, pulled Thomas aside after he'd asked one too many questions. "You're stirring up old ghosts, Tom," she warned, her eyes darting nervously around the empty store. "Some stones are better left unturned, especially when certain folks in town have worked hard to bury the past." "What do you mean?" "The Mackenzies didn't just lose a daughter, they lost their faith in this town, in people they'd known their whole lives." She lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "There were rumors, Tom, about who might have been involved, but rumors and proof are different things entirely." That evening, as Thomas was closing up his barn, he noticed fresh horse tracks in the mud, tracks that led right up to his barn door, then veered away quickly. Someone had been watching. Someone knew he'd been spending time in the loft where no reasonable man should be lingering. Word was getting around Silver Creek that Thomas Whitmore was acting strange, asking questions about dead girls, spending too much time alone. As he climbed the ladder to meet Sarah again, Thomas heard the distant sound of riders approaching his property. Multiple horses, moving fast. The hoofbeats grew louder, more urgent. Through the barn's upper window, Thomas counted 5 riders approaching through the moonless night, their faces hidden beneath pulled-down hat brims. They moved with the predatory purpose of men who'd come to end something. "They're coming for you," Sarah whispered, her form flickering more violently than ever before. "I can feel their anger, their fear." Thomas gripped his rifle tighter. "Fear of what? Of what you might discover." The riders reined up outside, their horses snorting and stamping in the sudden silence. Thomas recognized the voice that called out. Mayor Bradshaw, a man who'd served this town for 15 years and commanded respect from every rancher in the territory. "Thomas Whitmore, we need to talk." "It's late for a social call, Mayor. Come down from that loft, Tom. We know you're up there." Thomas felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. How did they know exactly where he was? Unless they'd been watching him for days. "Been hearing strange stories about you, Tom," called another voice. Deputy Marshal Kane. "Stories about a man who's been talking to ghosts, asking questions about things that happened before you even came to this valley." Sarah's form began to solidify, her terror giving her substance. "Thomas," she breathed, "one of those voices. I know one of those voices. Mrs. Henderson says you've been mighty curious about the Mackenzie girl." Bradshaw continued. "Now why would a man spend so much time dwelling on ancient history?" "Might be he's not dwelling," Kane suggested with dark amusement. "Might be he's disturbing things that should stay buried." Thomas felt the truth hit him like a physical blow. These men, respected pillars of the community, knew more about Sarah's disappearance than they'd ever admitted, and they'd come here tonight to make sure their secrets stayed buried. "You have 2 choices, Whitmore," Bradshaw called out. "Come down and ride out of this valley tomorrow, never to return, or force us to handle this the hard way." Sarah's hand touched his arm, and this time he felt it cold as winter ground, but real. "I remember now," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of 20 years of suppressed truth. "I remember who killed me." Through the barn door crack, Thomas saw the glint of drawn weapons in the moonlight. "Time's up, Tom." It was Deputy Kane, Sarah whispered, her form now solid enough to cast shadows in the lantern light. "He was courting me that summer, said he loved me, but when I told him no, when I said I was promised to another." Thomas watched her face as the memories flooded back, terrible, beautiful, and heartbreaking all at once. "He followed me out here, to this barn. My father was in town, and Kane knew I'd be alone tending the horses." Her voice grew stronger with each word, as if speaking the truth was finally setting her free. "He said if he couldn't have me, no one could. When I fought him, when I screamed," she touched her throat, and Thomas saw the phantom bruises there. "He strangled me, right here in this loft. Then he buried me somewhere out in the valley, and told everyone I'd run off. My poor parents spent years wondering if they'd failed me somehow." Outside, the men were growing impatient. Thomas heard them dismounting, their boots crunching across the yard toward the barn. "Sarah," Thomas said quietly, "I'm going to get justice for you. I promise." "No." Her hand tightened on his arm with surprising strength. "You're a good man, Thomas Whitmore. You've shown me more kindness in these few nights than I knew in my final days among the living. No. But I won't have your death on my conscience too." She moved to the window, her form beginning to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the lantern. "Besides, some wrongs can only be made right by the wronged. Sarah, what are you? Tell my parents, if they're still alive, that I loved them, that I never ran away, that I was murdered by a man who wore a badge and called it honor." The barn door creaked open below, heavy footsteps on the ladder rungs. Sarah turned to Thomas one final time, and he saw peace settling over her features like sunrise breaking over mountains. "Thank you for seeing me." for believing in me, for caring enough to seek the truth." She kissed his forehead, a blessing as light as autumn leaves, and then she was moving toward the ladder with purpose that made the very air hum with power. "Sarah, don't." But she was already descending, her form blazing now with the light of justice too long delayed. From below came the sound of men screaming. The screaming lasted only moments, but it seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Thomas climbed down to find Deputy Kane collapsed in the barn doorway, his face white as fresh snow, his hands clawing at his throat, as if invisible fingers were squeezing the life from him.
Oh!
The other men backed away in terror, as Sarah materialized fully before them, no longer the broken, frightened girl who'd wept in the loft, but a force of nature clothed in righteous fury. "Hello, William," she said to Kane, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades.
Ew.
"Did you think I'd forgotten?" Kane tried to speak, tried to deny, but no words would come. The truth was written in his terrified eyes, in the way he cowered before the girl he'd murdered 20 years ago. Mayor Bradshaw found his voice first. "Dear God, Sarah Mackenzie."
Oh!
"You knew," she said, turning that terrible gaze on him. "All of you knew, or suspected, and you covered it up because it was easier than facing the truth about your deputy marshal. We had no proof. You had a grieving family and a missing girl, and you chose to protect a killer." Sarah's form pulsed with otherworldly light. "But I'm not here for your judgment, only his." She looked down at Kane, who was now gasping for air that wouldn't come. "You stole my life, William, my future, my parents' peace. But death has given me something you can never take away, the power to ensure you face the consequences of your actions." Kane's eyes rolled back, and he went still. The other men scrambled for their horses, and rode hard into the night, leaving behind only the echo of hoofbeats, and the knowledge that some secrets refused to stay buried. Thomas stood alone with Sarah in the sudden silence. "Is it finished?" he asked. She nodded, her form already beginning to fade. "I can feel it. The pull is gone. I'm free to go where I should have gone 20 years ago." She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night. "Thank you, Thomas, for helping me remember, for helping me find peace. Will I see you again?" "No, but you'll carry this story, won't you? You'll make sure people know the truth." "I will." She was nearly transparent now, more memory than substance. "Good. The truth is all any of us really leave behind." And then she was gone, leaving only the scent of wild flowers, and the faintest echo of laughter, the sound of a young woman finally free. Thomas buried Kane properly, then rode to the territorial capital, to tell his story to the marshal there. An investigation was launched. Mayor Bradshaw and the others were removed from office, though they faced no criminal charges due to lack of evidence. But the Mackenzie family, Thomas learned, was still alive, living in Oregon, still hoping for word of their lost daughter. Thomas made the journey himself to tell them the truth, to give them the peace of knowing Sarah had never abandoned them. Years later, when Thomas was an old man sitting on his porch in the evening light, he would still sometimes catch the scent of wildflowers on the wind, and he would smile, knowing that somewhere beyond the veil between worlds, Sarah Mackenzie was finally truly free. The barn still stands today, though it's empty now. Local folks say that on certain summer evenings, when the light hits just right, you can see a young woman in a calico dress walking through the valley, not trapped anymore, but visiting, like someone returning home after a long, long journey.